Okay, thank you, RC. Very welcome to this session. Uh, Today we will discuss another genre of short stories, which is the investigative stories. But before that, as our ritual is, that we take a small recapitulatory view of what we did, what we discussed yesterday. So, learners, yesterday we discussed the format for children's short story. What do they contain? How do they develop? What is important in the short stories that are written for children? And also, what is the importance of the language and illustration? So during this process, we discussed the first initially we discussed the appropriateness of the theme or how to choose an appropriate theme. So I think we are all aware that the Indian literature, classical literature as well as the medieval literature, is full of such material which can give us good clues about the style, about the themes, about the topics, about the areas which can be taken for writing short stories for children. Very importantly, we have been talking about the situation that is very important. So in this particular discussion point, we use the word uh, environment, and we also use the word situation as well as atmosphere. So particularly with regard to the children's story writing, this atmosphere plays a very important role because most of the characters in children's short stories tend to be unreal, they tend to be imaginary, and like that. So it is very important that the atmosphere is created so that it corresponds or is in consonance with the characteristics of the characters or the peculiarity that the characters have. So if it is words, depiction, then there has to be trees, there has to be jungle, there has to be such environment where the birds can be easily found, or there can be a good environment, a good situation for the birds to come, sit, and chirp, murmur, like that. Then we also discussed about the narratives. That is very important. What do we mean by narratives? We discussed yesterday that there is a plot, there is development of the plot, then there are end to the plot or the theme. But how does all this happen? See, who makes it happen? That is the narrations. That is the narratives, which are narrated by the different characters. So this is a complementary job with regard to the narratives, which is done by the characters, and how the narrative should be like, whether they should be close-ended or they should be open-ended. But we found out during the discussion that in most of the time the situation demands that the narratives should be open-ended, because if these are closed-ended, then they do not give ample opportunity child to fly into the imagination or animate into the unknown. So this unknown which the child would like to explore will only be possible when his narratives are open-ended, means they allow him or her to further investigate what could be there, what are the possibilities. Thirdly, one very important issue which we were discussing but couldn't complete due to the frequent power breakdown and as a result the connectivity issue, So we tried our best to finish it yesterday, but then just couldn't do it because there was complete failure of uh, the signal. So we will take it up today once again, though we had discussed few points of this particular fourth part of the discussion for the children's writing. So this is about language and illustration. We all know. I'll take the second part first, and then we'll come to the language. Illustrations are very important in the children's literature because the illustrations they appeal to a child from the very beginning. Every child likes to see the cartoons. They like to have the pictures. Then they like to get involved with all the pictures, and they also curiously look into the characters of the cartoons. Even when the stage is the play is on the stage, and then there's a clown who makes such remarks, such actions which are not, which seems to be unrealistic in the truer world. But children do enjoy those kinds of actions as well. Similarly, when there is a writing for children, then they do not want very analytical writings, very conclusive writings, or very hard writings. They want simple stories, small stories, as we mentioned yesterday. They want the imaginary characters in their short stories. They would like to a situation where they can roam with those characters. They can, fly. They can swim. They can walk over hills and cross the mountains and land in a fairyland, and where there are a lot of pretty girls, small girls playing in the orchard, and there are a lot of flowers in it. There are beautiful birds around. There are plenty of animals who are coming and playing with the children like that. So what I'm trying to say is that the illustration is very important part of the children's literature. Now come to the part first, that is the language. Language is very very important. You know, without proper use of language, it is very difficult to make any proper uh, short story or novel or even poetry. Language plays a central role because language is one such tool which allows our ideas to get expressed. That is one. The language also helps us to concretize our thoughts and ideas. Language is that what connects the author with the reader. So, so this is very important tool. What should be the format of the language? Because the language has words, it has phrases, it has sentences, it has its own typical style and tone. Because if we are writing for children, the style and the tone has to be very different. I mean, it definitely has to be different from the style and tone which is applied for the adult story writing. Similarly, the tone is very important. So we'll come to it. And dialogue in fiction. It is very important that the dialogue in fiction for children are not like the dialogues that are there in the adult or in the general fiction. Because if the dialogues are too complex, too long, having a lot of modifiers, then the children will lose interest in it. So they want straight, they want short, they want precise kind of information coming from the dialogues. So the very first issue which I thought we would discuss with you, though it is being repeated, but I thought it is very important one, so there is no harm in repeating it. The very first issue was the appropriateness. So what is appropriateness? I mean, there has to be an appropriateness in the selection of the words. So what is you see, we have lot of options, if there is a good memory with the uh, story writer or the author, then obviously he or she will have a lot of choices. So how to choose the right word, that is very important. So we have to see the concept behind the behind what we would like to convey, then the attitude of the readers or the children, how will they react to that particular word, and also what worldview we create through that word and word. So that is to be seen. So sometimes we have lot of options, so it is advisable, you know, to look for the smarter yet very precise word, so that the children are not distracted and they are not confused with long jargon. This is very important, that it should be very, very appropriate. I gave yesterday an example of, like, sometimes we say, no, there was something which was put around the whole thing and then it was bound together. So instead we can say a ring bonds together the all the pieces which were scattered. So like this, there are a lot of words which are in a way encompassing the whole idea, attitudes, and the objectives of that narrative or word, we can say. We also slightly discussed how to introduce difficult words. So it is very important that during the stories, during the any writing for children, some difficult words must also be introduced. So it is not that the difficult words should all together be avoided, because that way there won't be any linguistic upgradation of the child or linguistic development of the child. In order to do that, in order to make the children grow in the use of language as they grow in by age, or as they grow by their different standards, it is very important that they are also provided an opportunity to grow in the use of words, use of language. So I gave some examples yesterday, like salutations. What is salutation? It is salutation is when you say something, you are welcome, please come in, something like it. Somebody enters into the room and say salutations. So primarily it is just to salute, means to greet. So if that 2-3 lines explanation is there, or in it is explained from various angles in 2-3 sentences by different characters, by different voices, definitely the term will become very, very clear, very transparent to the children. So they will use it later quite easily. There has to be fresh imagery, because children do get bored very soon. So whatever if they find in one sentence some imagery, if that is repeated in the next sentence or next paragraph, the children won't they appreciate it, because they are such in such age, in such age that they like new, they like newness in every sentence, in every action in their life. Be it playing, they don't want to continue play like in the same format. Somebody just throws a ball to the bat from different angles. So somebody might just run and just knock on the bails. It is their own ideology. It is their own thinking. It will not have any rational. Why a child behaves in a particular manner, very difficult to rationalize it. What is important in the story writing, because it is basically a world of uh, fantasy. So the children live in the world of fantasy, live in the world of imagination, So the imaginaries shouldn't be stale or old, they should be fresh. So that is very important that short story writer, author thinks that way. Uh, then we also discussed that we should avoid verbiage words. That means sometimes you put together certain words which do not have very distinct meaning. So instead of two, the only one word will be quite enough. So we should avoid such words. So we see, like, somebody say he has won. So we cannot say he has put somebody out. Say for example, if there are two teams, playing a sport, and team A wins, team A and team B loses. So when we say team A win, we shouldn't say team B has been put out of the competition. That is nonsense. So, like this, it is better to use the words just win. One very small point, but very important, for writing for children should be tight writing, very consolidated writing. That means there shouldn't be too much of beating the bush. What is that? Beating around the bush is something that one sentence is scattered in a couple of sentences, whereas that all those other sentences or all two, three sentences can be easily taken out of that narrative, and only one sentence can be a good communicator. So sometimes we say, I was walking around the road when I saw a man in tattered clothes. Then I went to the man and asked him, "Why are you wearing tattered clothes?" Looking at me, he said, "No, this is not your business." Something like that. So, what we can simply say, uh, he he went to the man in tattered clothes and asked him what he needs. Just this one. So sometimes it is our habit, it is an individual's habit to write like something like, uh, Ashok had come yesterday. He was my brother, and he is going to stay with me because he is our relative. So when one say he is my brother, he then there is no need to say he is my relative. So we can simply say my brother Ashok came yesterday to stay with us for a few days. So there is no need to say my brother came yesterday. He will stay for a few days with us. He is staying us with us because he is our relative, and like that. So there are three sentences. Instead, you can say simply one sentence. My brother Ashok came yesterday to stay with us for some time. So when you say brother, then there is no need to say he is our relative. Like that, it is not very often, but in some cases it has been seen that some authors are in habit of writing some sentences which are not required. So what I'm trying to say is that the writing should be very, very tight. Now a small take a small cognizance of the sentence structure. How the sentence structure should be. That means how the sentences we discussed, the right, choosing right word, choosing right expression, choosing the tight expression. But if we look at the sentence structure, then it is very important that we stick to the mm, principles which have been recommended by various seasoned or acclaimed or luminary child story writers. The very first one, which is very important in any writing, in fact, it is important, more so in the children's writing. Uh, the sentences shouldn't be very long, one, and they shouldn't be, you know, or they shouldn't be um, such brief that they don't convey what is to be done by this sentence. So that means it is not that they should always be very smart or very short, very brief, because if they are obscure, if they are not conveying anything, then there is no fun to reduce it in the small size. But very long sentences too are not very appreciated. So in children's writing specifically, the sentences should be small. You can say, Sheila has a pretty dog. She takes the dog. She takes her dog every day for a walk, and when her friends visit her, they also play with her dog, like that. So the child who reads this particular style of narratives, he doesn't have any big problem to make meaning out of it. But if we say that Sheila, who has many friends, has a pretty dog which goes with her for walk, and when her friends visit her house, uh, they also come to her room and then play with her dog. So it is not required. Simply, Sheila takes her dog for a walk, and when her friends visit, they also play with the dog. Another important point with the children's writing is the very sentence structure. Children do not want the same sentence structure repeated. They want it to be replaced by another style, by another format. So each sentence should be something which is having newness in it. Only then it will appeal to the children. And also in any writing, of course, along with children's writing, it is important that grammatical errors, grammatical or syntactic pitfalls, that means wrong words, wrong grammatical mistakes, and the syntactical mistakes are avoided. There shouldn't be any glaring mistake, because it will put a negative impression on the children. Dear learners, we all know that everyone likes to write differently, but one shouldn't take it as a liberty. Try to develop your own style, your own tone, but do not, deviate so much that you lose the basic sense of the grammar and the structure. So, too many modifiers are not required, too many generalities are also not required. And one very important aspect is that the Latin derivatives, which are otherwise very good in the knowledge literature. I mean, the knowledge literature will use them quite frequently. But when we come to writing for children, you see, it is very difficult for the children to properly understand the Latin derivatives until unless they are grown enough and they are studying the language at a higher level, then they will read. So we all know that uh, the Latin derivatives are very important because they are able to explain the conceptual tone and conceptual background of the words. Like, for example, we have a very frequently used word in culmination. All the discussion culminated into uh, electing Rakesh as a principal of the college. The interview culminated in the selection of Rakesh as principal of the college. So we shouldn't use the word culmination when we are writing for children. what we can do is we can say the discussion ended in selecting Rakesh as the principal of the college. So instead of culmination, because this will be too difficult for the children. Similarly, there's a word prevarication that is meant to convey the word simply lie, L-I-E. So L-I-E is much simpler, much straight, and it is appreciated by the children. Similarly, we have a word um, which is not like sometimes we say he has been ruled out. Ruled out means he has been taken out. So that means he has been ended. So if there is a word end, then there is no place for the word dilapidation. So same is for rain, for which there is a precipitation. The Latin word is precipitation. So instead of precipitation, we should use the word hence, rain. So like this, children's literature has also to be written in a particular tone. The tone should be direct. It should be, a very personalized. It should be very, such moderate. It has to be in a very affectionate style so that it doesn't hit the child like something which is unknown, unannounced. So, a small look at the dialogue in fiction. So, we discussed yesterday also that what the dialogues do. Dialogues are very important in the fiction because there has to be development, there has to be movement in the story, in the plot. So how the plot will move, or how the theme will move, or how the situation will be created, or how the atmosphere will be created. So that is always created through the dialogues. So if, say, for example, there is a short story uh, for children, which is talking about the honeybees. So what there will be one character which will making noise like honeybees. Another one will be a character like a girl. She will be running away from the honeybees because she's afraid that they might not bite her. Then there are flowers. Then they will jiggle, something like it. So what all this does, it doesn't hold the story back. It speed up the story, so it moves the story ahead. Then characterize the speakers. So this is very important. How, say for example, if we are talking about like Uttaram Charita or like Ramayana, where there is an credits about love and kush. If the love and kush do not, if love and kush are not allowed to speak, are not allowed to make the to narrate or to put the dialogues, if the dialogues are not there for love and kush, then those two characters, then we will not be able to see the element of heroism or heroic character of the protagonist or the character. So, in order to present the character in a particular way, I mean, how to characterize the speaker. So it also characterizes the speaker. Who is speaker? We come to know through the dialogues. How does he or she behaves? We come to know through the dialogues and so forth. So this is very important. Thirdly, very important that the information, which is integral part of the development of the story part, because we are not talking about information like economical information or the information for advertisement or so forth. The information here is about what is happening if the children are playing in a orchard, in an orchard, and suddenly they get little uh, they feel a little unsafe. An element of uncertainty appears in their dialogues. Then that gives rise that yes, some other character is entering into the situation. Maybe an animal which is frightening, maybe a person who is not good looking, and the children are afraid of afraid to that person. So this fearfulness, what this fearfulness is brought into the situation or into the atmosphere by the help of the dialogues. So dialogues are very important. They give information about the plot, and they also state the facts, then intensify emotions. This is very important, very minutely put, but a very important point. As I mentioned, children are playing, so they are very happy, but suddenly some strange kind of impression appears on their faces, and they withdraw from the playing and squeeze themselves together and look at particular direction. So they are now intense in they are worried about something. So there's a impression of intensity upon their faces. So this intensity is caused by the dialogues. Add flavor, atmosphere, and local color. In whatever situation the story is progressing, that that story, that kind of impact of the story is always conveyed through the dialogues. This is very important. So this is what we discussed yesterday. We discussed the selection of appropriate theme for the children's short stories. Then we discussed what is fantasy. Then we discussed the narratives, open-ended narratives or closed-ended narratives, which are preferred. Then very importantly, we discussed the language and illustration. This is all about writing about children's short story. We will, dear learners, we will move ahead now, and we will go to the another format of the short stories, which is uh, the investigative short stories. How do we write investigative short stories? What are their characters? How do the different characters play into these kinds of short stories? And what makes the investigative or the detective stories? So the detection is basically the investigation. So these are also known as detective stories. Perhaps all of you are aware about the haunting stories of Shimla, like haunting stories of Dehradun or haunting stories of Masuri, like that. There are many foreign authors who have written a lot about the haunting stories. So all this comes into the area of investigation, and eventually those are called the detective stories. So today we will discuss the detective stories. Uh, During this discussion, we will discuss what makes the detective stories. That is the prime question. So we all know that there is an atmosphere of suspense and uncertainty. So this atmosphere is typical one, which automatically creates a feeling amongst the readers that something is to be unraveled, something is hidden that has to be looked into, investigated into, and when we investigate it, then there is a person, there's a character who does it, and that character who does it become a detective. So the stories which are having the character named the detective are the detective stories. Similarly, in the this is where I think one very good example. We spoke just now that in children's short stories there is open-ended narratives. But if we come to the detective stories, there is always closing characters. All the narratives will be close-ended. So it is closed narratives, close end. Third, how the dialogues. We are talking about the dialogues. What do? They take the story away, ahead, and they move it. They they allow the characters to speak, and thereby the characters are characterized. Then the mm, dialogues also help to bring in the facts, the information, and eventually the dialogues. They give the beginning, they provide the climax, and then there is an end to it. So all this is done by the help of the dialogues. So dialogues will scrutinize dialogues in terms of the detective stories. And finally, there is an issue which is the uh, you know multiple clues, devices of multiple clues. If you look at the detective stories, you will find very interesting aspects of the detective stories is that there are multiple devices. So what are multiple devices? Means there are chemical reports, there are investigations, there are laboratory report, and all this put together will take the story to the conclusion, to the end, and then we will come with a very closed-ended statement. That means the suspense is totally resolved, and the uncertainty that was there with the reader, because reader might have been thinking that if there was a murder in the short story, there is a dacoity in the short story, then in that dacoity there must be a band of dacoits who might have committed the crime. But eventually, one finds that it is not committed by the by the gang of dacoits, but the theft has been done by the person who was supposed to look after it, because his mind got polluted. He just tempted to take a lot of money in one attempt, so he committed the crime. So otherwise, so this is the revelation. This is a very important point. So there are different devices. Devices means there are literary tools. Those are used to heighten the experience, and ultimately it gives happiness. It satisfies the reader, because then the reader thought, oh, I also thought that perhaps a very dreaded team of dacoits had attacked the ATM machines which was lying in somebody's premises, and they took it away, and they caused the dacoity. But when the story is unraveled, it is totally unfolded, it is found that the owner of the house himself was party to it. He had informed, given the details of the availability of the security staff, their laxity, their change of shift, and like many other crucial parts which are important part in the information, making information complete. So that would mean that even though the dacoity must have been committed by a certain criminal who must have been hired for that purpose, but the fact which becomes very clear is that one who is doing what, who is the real character, that confusion is removed, and it becomes very clear to the author as to what happens and there is a definitive end. So it is not imaginative end, it is a definitive end. So all these devices, all these tools, literary tools are there for the detective stories. So very first question is can be asked, what characterizes the detective stories? So the very simple answer to that is the stories that are woven in the environment of suspense and uncertainty, certain and uncertainty. So what is the uncertainty? Means there is a confusion. Suspense means that things are so interpolated, interlocked, that it is very difficult to see through them very clearly and you know making the target visible. So it is very difficult. It takes a lot of time to make the target visible. Or what I'm trying to say is to come to the final stage where we can say, yes, A committed the crime with the help of so and so, and now this is the situation. So this is what about the suspense and the uncertainty. Uh, it is a very basic understanding that most of us are, very avid reader of the mysteries. So mystery is something which is not known to us, which is unknown to us, which is to which to which we are unfamiliar. Our experience has not been there with in that particular happening, in that particular event, in that particular area, and then we start to imagine. So that's a mystery. Mystery doesn't stop you because it prompts you to imagine. So when you try to imagine, you don't come to a conclusion. You are divided. You think for both, and yet you are not very sure for which one should think as a final view. So, see, the detective fiction is sensational. It's not truly sensational. It is not only. It is not meant to be sensational. It is sensational to a point where something serious has been committed, and that has implication to the lives of the common people. So this implication part makes it little more scary. So people would like to know about the events which are in reading very scary, and also create an environment of uncertainty and an environment of the suspense. Say, for example, if there's a story about the committing a crime, then we know that the crime is committed in the not in a broad daylight. Maybe that can also happen, but most often somebody will attack either from behind or in a patch which is dark enough, or in the garb of night when it is very dark. Or maybe somebody will not come from the front, somebody will hit from the back. So it is something that gives you a shock, and that kind of description becomes plot for the detective story, because that plot has to be investigated. There are two things: uncertainty and suspense doesn't make detective stories, but uncertainty and sensation, suspense, all this put together makes a situation which has to be investigated. So what is investigated is a detection. So the one who does the detection is the detective. There has been a long tradition of detective stories. We all know Agatha Christie's. We all know Sherlock Holmes. We have seen the productions based on the Sherlock Holmes detective stories. Uh, there are a lot of authors who have written detective stories. So there are in some stories there are characters which within one family there will be certain characters, and each character will be working, will be making a different kind of detection. Sometimes in Eastern Europe there used to be detectives in one families. The father will be detecting the activities of the mother. The children will be detecting the activities of their parents, and like that. That was of course atmosphere created in a particular period in the Eastern Europe. But in journal form also, we know that sometimes very big people are also investigated. So whatever goes into the arena of investigation, that ultimately becomes detection, and the one person who does the detection is the detective. So stories which has the detective, which has a person doing the work of detection, those are detective stories. Uh, Usually, this is little interesting. If we look at this Sherlock Holmes short detective stories, then he always have uh, associate characters with him. He will have one lady character who is both the secretary as well as companion, and also an assistant. But there is one character which is always there, and that character is the one who is making the technical analysis. Because in detective stories there is always a scope for forensic examination of say for example the samples that are received from the scene of crime, which we often call the blood samples, the viscera. So there is a third thing is that there is use of certain technical terms. So all this is done. So there is a technical person who does all this job. So in every short story, the detective will have certain number of companions, and those companions are usually in all the detective stories written by a particular author, and those are characters which remains almost same in all the short stories. So the detective, there are different types of detectives. Sometimes there are detectives in the garb of priest, in the garb of policeman. Sometimes there are auto detectives like a robot who, you know, standing in the darkness, but keeping an eye on all the activities that are taking place in that hall, which is otherwise not having any lights on. So in the dark, pitch dark also, somebody is looking, having an eye on the actions of people who are entering into that hall. So there is a robotic detective in that particular room. So now we come to what is the essence of the detective stories. What is essence is the we can say uh, central point, the real suspense. That is what is created in a detective story. The detective stories actually, progresses like a step-by-step process of a rational inquiry. So first of all, we know in any detective story there will be plot of usually the plot of crime. So crime can be murder, it can be theft, it can be looting, it can be any other unethical act. That will be that that kind of plot is there. So then, when some crime is committed, immediately it is the reporter to the police. Then the police visits the spot with the detective, so, or the forensic examiners, and then the detective takes the sample or makes certain surveys of the situation, and then he starts investigating the crime. That means he asks certain questions, he looks for certain informations, and then he makes visits to certain places. So that way he does lot of actions, lot of activities. All these activities, all these actions happens in a step by step process. Means the step by step process means they are in a arranged. They happens in a logical order, or in a rational, in rational priority. This inquiry happens first of all. The site is visited, sample is taken, it is taken to the laboratory, it analysis are brought about. Then the suspect, the areas which are involved, different areas where the crime has been committed. Say for example, at one place, then the body might have been dumped at another place, then the clothes might have been thrown somewhere else, and then the actual weapon might have been thrown in a ditch or in a pond. So all these places are visited. Then the evidences are collected, and those are brought into the laboratory. Those are discussed within the team of the associate and the main detective and the associated detectives. Then certain more lab analysis takes place. So it is a step-by-step process of rational inquiry. So it is the rational inquiry, means it is not imaginative. It is not. It is based on the facts. So you see now all these activities naturally creates an environment or uh, situation of suspense, atmosphere of suspense. So how the environment of suspense is to be sustained. This is very important. As I mentioned to you, it's a step by step process of rational inquiry. So when the detective visits the site of the crime, he simply looks at it cursorily. Then he asks his or her assistant to collect the samples from this, and then he doesn't speak out anything. The if press reporters ask him what is the who might have committed the crime, he says no. There is no clue as of now. Then he goes into the laboratory. Then he doesn't discloses it. They just take the results out and correlate it with certain other results, certain other samples, and doesn't reveal anything. So this not revealing anything is primarily to sustain the suspense. This happens, quite lot. Quite often, it is seen that suspense is not only sustained but it is also deepened. So the mystery becomes very, very dominating. There is a criminal who has committed the crime. He's being investigated, but to which direction the investigation is proceeding, who are going to be the real culprits, who is going to be the murderer, or who is going to be the help in the murder, something like it. So all this is kept secret, and this keeping the facts secret creates a kind of environment of the mystery. So it is done in a logical chain. as I mentioned to you, that it is not without a rational sequence. First, the crime is committed, then the police is informed, then the detective is invited, then the view is taken of the crime scene, and then samples are taken. Those are analyzed. More sites are visited. More samples are taken. Samples are correlated. Statements are made. Dialogues explain the different nature of different samples, different uh, uh, results that are drawn. Those are again corroborated, but no final statement is made. This is all to deepen the memory. This is all to deepen the memory. So, like this, the suspense remains throughout the action. So, this suspense, which remains throughout the action, actually deepens it deepens the result. It deepens uh, the story much more in a manner which makes it more and more mystic. So ultimately, the mystery is solved, and when the final statement is made, so we will discuss in a little while about it. That what are the types of characters are there, and what is the role of the dialogues. The dialogues help to deepen the mystery, and finally, the dialogues also help to resolve the mystery, where we have very closed-ended dialogues, because there has to be a definitive result of the investigative or the detective stories, when we know come to know finally that who was the actual culprit. So, but before that, there is a lot of suspense, there is a lot of uncertainty, and the actions of the person who is a detective keeps the mystery maintained, because he or she doesn't reveal anything except for conducting various activities. Uh, Secondly, it is very important that in the characters of the detective stories are actually chosen very carefully. Uh, so, because they will help in the development of the story. And maybe the simple characters can work in any journal story or the formula stories. But if you look at the detective stories, the characters are very typical. Uh, Particularly the detective. He wears a coat. He's not in kurta pajama, or he's not in informal dress. Usually, he wears a very typical type of dress. His associates are also typically wearing like jackets, and sometimes some weapons are hidden inside the jackets. Then there is an assistant who mostly happen to be a lady, but eventually she is also trained detective. And then we have characters like who are the victims. Then there are characters who are the criminals, who commits the crime. So there are different types of characters in the detective stories. So each character is actually creating a kind of mystic environment, with his or her activities. For example, if whom we consider the victim in the beginning, he might not be very straightforward character. His actions are quite dubious. He walks, in the night. He behaves in a slightly eccentric way. He doesn't eat food at proper time. He is a late riser. He's late riser and late sleep goers. So there are a lot of characters which automatically makes one's life or one person as a dubious character. So this further gives rise to the mystery, because what is mystery? The mystery is that which is not clear to us. The more we try to look into it, the more deeper it becomes. So the skillful author of detective stories makes it really cool, and he doesn't allow. He allows a lot of conclusions to be made, but he doesn't allow definitive conclusion out of his or her characters. So the characters are a very important part of the mystery stories, because these detective stories are also called mystery stories, called the investigative stories, and so forth. So the the characters are not just mere types or subsidiary. There are no subsidiary characters in the mystery stories or in the detective stories. Each character will have a very specific role, uh, and they have very a very important part in the plot which is there for the detective story. Say, for example, if you look at a thief who has committed the crime, he is the chief character, But then there is another character who is helping the thief to run, and eventually he is also caught, he is also investigated, and he is also punished. So that means the second character is equally important. Third character is the detective himself or herself. So obviously, he or she is a lead character. Then the associates also. Sometimes the associate will get hurt in the chase of the criminals. So that character also. So what I'm trying to say through all this discussion is that all these characters have to be given proper space in the plot of the short story, of the detective story. It cannot be that some characters are just for the sake of mention and they don't have much or bigger role. Except that, like if the character happens to, say for example, if the thief who has committed the crime and is running, and he feels very, very thirsty, suddenly he saw a house and knocks at the house and simply say, please give me glass of water. So the house lady, without looking into much at the person, perhaps she is frightened inside, but she brings about immediately a glass of water and then gives it to the person. The person drinks the water and just moves away. So this is a guest appearance, but maybe just guest character, so that we know that it is just to make a situation, because later on there might be a team of investigators who will visit that house also and make inquiry as to whether the lady has seen. Then she comes with her statement, yes, she saw him, but briefly and didn't take much note. He sounded a little frustrated man, a little in disarray, but she doesn't speak up that she definitely thinks that he was a thief or he was a criminal, because she probably didn't take that character seriously. So to bring in about small ups and downs into the story, such characters are also introduced. But each character must be given due space for performing what we say is a fuller bodied performance. So full body performance means role which fulfills the expectations from a character. That kind of space has to be given to the character in the detective stories also. The detective story writer must establish motivation. This is very important. Say, for example, if there is a detective story in which a detective is looking into the crime, and his associates are also, working very hard, but it's a long journey to, finally come to the conclusion that will be provided to the reader. In between, there must be some small achievements, you know, there must be small gains, so that the story sounds that it is not giving any depression kind of idea impression, but it is moving into a direction where some solution will be found. So the writer must have establish motivation. The short story writer must keep the element of motivation within the characters, so that sometimes they are little, depressed because they are not making headway. Then again, some clue will suddenly appear there. Say, for example, if they are searching for the place to where the crime was made, the criminal is, the victim is there on the ground, maybe injured or killed, and the detectives are there to see for the clues, so they don't find anything. So they visit the place around midnight again, and during the pitch dark, in the gleam of the torch light, they find a key. They will say, "What is this key?" Then they look at the key. Then they look at the various locks where that key can be fitted into, and so finally that is a lead. So this lead is called lead in the criminal situation is for motivation. So the writer must, keep on giving motivations, without which the story will be stalled and it will not move ahead. So such small clues have to be there. Uh, we all know that the chief important person in the detective stories is the victim. So the entire focus is on the victim. So he's very important. If you look at the Sherlock Holmes detective stories, then the scene of the crime, or the, person who has been hurt, who has been killed, is the dead victim. What you is the most center of interest. The opening words are about that person. He is in the center stage. Then there is an important, psychological factor in the detective story. That is the criminal's motive. So the uncertainty about the criminal's motive, or the supposition, or the assumption about the criminal's motive, is one very important element that gives rise to the suspense. And as the suspense deepens, it becomes more and more mysterious. That is the character of the detective story. Now, there is an issue with the detective's qualification. So, if you look at Edgar Allan Poe's detective stories, we always find, so and so MA, forensic science, uh, is the detective. So it is always mentioned, because if somebody has to be, introduced as a detective, then he has to be, his character has to be proven very different and very professional and authoritative in particular area. That means in the area of investigation, his views, his place has to be mentioned as the final directive place, as a professional place, as a person who makes the final statement. So it is usually his qualification is also mentioned. Either he's a trained doctor, he's a trained investigator, he's a trained analyst, or he's a psychologist. If there is a short story about crime which has much very higher psychological angle to it, then he is a trained psychologist. As I mentioned to you already, the detective will have certain or quite a few companions. Those are usually professionals, and most often one of them will be a female character. So all these things goes into the detective stories. Uh, so the detective stories the stories which are mostly around built around the scenes of crime. It may be murder, it may be theft, it may be espionage, or something like it. Then we also see that there is a person who is a professional, and then there is a step by step rational moving ahead process, and it goes by a logical order. There's a scene crime, there's a crime, there's a scene of the crime, there is information to the police or the law agencies or land order agencies. Then there is the visit of the investigator, then taking of the samples, then a person who looks into the whole details, then he detects certain things, and then he is called the detectives. Then there are detectives associates. Then there is a specific style of dialogues which takes the story ahead and makes certain informations about the samples that are taken from the scene of the crime, and then those are corroborated, but no definitive statement is made. That gives rise to mystery and mysterious descriptions, mysterious situation, mysterious atmosphere that is there in the short story makes a short story into a detective short story. So we'll take another aspect of the detective short story into our discussion, and this is about the dialogues. I have already mentioned to you what the dialogues do. Dialogues have very important character. Earlier we discussed the role of the dialogues as moving the story ahead, and making the truth revealed, bringing lot of information, and characterize the characters. In detective short stories, the the dialogues are equally important. What they do, they are very intimate with the characters. If the dialogues characterize the characters, obviously they have very close relation with the characters, and the dialogues gives life to the character. You see, if a detective is not able to make statement, if his associate are not able to collaborate, then what is the purpose of the dialogues? So they gives life to the character, and in detective stories there isn't a very open space for long dialogues. You see, they cannot speak, say, "Oh yes, yes, I have seen it," like this. Have you gone through the crime site? Yes, sir. That is enough. Then what did you find? I collected the sample. Have the sample been results have come out? Not yet. Expected today. Okay. When they come, give them, show them to me like this. So very short, very short space for the dialogues in the detective stories. What do they ultimately do? They do the same thing as they have been doing with the other other forms of short stories like portraying the character, revealing the motive, and developing the actions. You see, developing the actions means if there are no dialogues, then how the detective will come to know about the samples which were taken. He will have to say something. So they develop the actions. Dialogues are also very important. In detective stories, you see, they are not. They are quite different in nature. They have to be conversational because there is little scope. There is little scope for murmuring when one speaks to oneself in a situation when there is no headway. But usually it is conversational. And toss. What did you find at the place at the scene of the crime? Sir, I didn't find anything. There is no makeup. It is very terse. And they are very suggestive, the dialogues. Highly suggestive. What? You should have found out the handkerchief because that was missing. No, sir, I didn't find it. But then you must go there again and search the body again, and perhaps you will find one. So that way, the dialogues are highly suggestive. Suggestive means they are making a kind of situation which is presumptive of something that will happen in the next phase. So all these are the functions of the dialogues. We have already discussed dialogues. What are their role? What is their nature? How they are made? And this is one important character of the dialogues in the detective stories. They are very brutal, terse, and cynical in the modern short stories. Specifically in the modern short stories, what are they like? You see, they are full of vulgarity. They are very brute. They are terse. They don't show any sympathy, and they don't shirk from like, oh, take this part away. Take, cut into two pieces. So normally in the old stories or in normal short stories, the blood, the killing, rape, or any other crime of that nature is avoided on the scene. But in detective stories, particularly with regard to the modern detective stories, all this has become very, very dominating. So there will be a sense of brutality in the dialogues, and they will not show any sympathy, any passion, any concern to the human body, to the victim even. And they are very straightforward. They are very professional and cynical. So another feature of the dialogues in detective story is that when the final dialogue is made, say for example in Watson in the Sherlock Holmes, he takes something and then say, this person has poisoned the king. So what they do, they close the story, they declare the criminal, they make the climax resolving the confusion, and also they present a situation where the criminal himself or herself confesses the crime. So it is so much of is happening in a dialogue that it is almost ending the short story. So the dialogues are very important, and the creative writer must be very careful about writing the dialogues, particularly in the detective stories. So I would say that there is an important role of the dialogues in the detective stories, because more than anything else, the role of the detective story, the role of dialogues in the detective story is very, very important, because that will allow the story to move ahead. That will, as I mentioned, that it will introduce the characters, it will portray the characters, rather, if I say so. Because if there is a chemist in the detective story, then the chemist will be delivering certain dialogues. Say, for example, I analyzed this from this angles, and it shows this very particular changes in the blood, and this is because of the certain type of poison which has been given to the victim. So all this makes it is a portrayal of a chemist who seemingly trained chemist, professional in that area. Or if it is associate investigator in the detective story, or detective's associate, then he says, I visited, when you asked me to visit that place of crime, I visited it and collected the samples, but I didn't find anybody there. So that means the associate is fully characterized by the help of the dialogues. So now come with the another aspect, which is the devices of multiple clues. So devices of multiple clues means certain devices are built in the story. Devices, certain tools are built around the story to give multiple clues. Means if there is a murder, if there is a theft case, if there is a espionage, then certain things will be put together in the story so that they allow the scenes to be investigated and put it ahead. So, first of all, the importance of the devices is that these, in a way, because in the crimes or in the other stories which are there, we don't find too many uh, devices, too many help. So devices are here tools. Those are kind of help which are which associates in finding out the either the investigating the crime scene or to come to a conclusion. For example, these devices are if a murder case, then maybe broken button of the shirt of the murderer, maybe a small piece of cloth, maybe a cap which has been left behind, or there may be knife, there may be a bottle of something, there may be a bag full of groceries which the victim might have been carrying at the time of attack, and like so. Another aspect of the devices is the devices also makes the reading very not only interesting, but it also makes the reading very challenging. because say for example, if somebody who is victim, he might have been carrying a lot of money. Maybe he got the salaries and he might have been bringing the salary home, so a lot of money would have been with him or her. Then somebody, attacked on that person. So this way, all these devices, maybe a golden ring is found around the scene of the crime. Then what happens is that all these devices, not only that they make the scene of the crime interesting to the readers, or rather saying it otherwise, that not only that they help the investigators or the detectives to make headway on the scene of, on this particular episode, but they also make the reading very interesting, because they add various dimensions. One reader would say, oh, he might have been carrying a lot of money with him. Then another one say, well, then in that case there might have been some gold also with him. Oh, his ring was missing or not? Then somebody will say, no, he used to wear a very expensive watch. Is the watch still with him, or it has been removed? So whether it has been removed, the money has been snatched, or something else has been done, all these factors add a different dimension to the story. So all this is, adding a lot of dimensions to the detective story, because the lot of interest is reason. It arouses a lot of suspicion, and it also allows a lot of other characters to bring into the picture, because if there is a ring which has been snatched, that means whether the ring has been snatched at the time of crime by the criminal itself, or maybe somebody else might have been passing through the scene. So a lot of speculative assumptions are there. So that means a lot of other characters are also finding their scope to come into the picture. So this is the skillful description of the short detective short story writers, that he how many devices he can bring in into the story, and with the help of all those characters, the plot becomes very, though very complex, but it becomes very interesting to the readers. Readers assume, readers moves their imagination into a lot of directions. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of scope for interpretation. So these clues become you know heart of the detective's art. Detective's art means principally they are the heart of the detectives, but at the same time they are also expressive elements in the writing art of the author. So the author can bring in a lot of new angles to the episode, to the story. Uh, Now, if you look at the Sherlock Holmes stories, then what he does, he keeps the suspense, keeps the mystery all together, allowing it to be more and more deepened. And he brings in a lot of characters. Say, for example, the old lady who has been attacked. Then he brings in another beautiful lady, her daughter, into the scene crime. Then perhaps another young woman who might have been with the young lady at the cafe, she's also brought into. Then the young waitress who might have served the drinks to the old lady when she visited the restaurant during her visit to bank. Then that part is also brought in. And then perhaps one young man who was at the pub, at the restaurant, he's also introduced into this story. So there is a lot of interest to the readers, because the readers continue to interpret whether there is a third love angle between the story, whether the daughter was not in good terms with the older lady, and the old lady was withdrawing a lot of money from her bank account, and whether the stepfather, whom the old lady married, was not in good terms with the daughter. You see, a lot of issues are there. When the daughter itself is doubtful about the stepfather, and she keeps on, doubting, speculating whether my stepfather might not be behind the scene of crime. So this way, a lot of speculative element is there in the short story, which is a detective story. So all this speculation, all this assumption, all this array of expectations, all this array of different relationship gives rise not only to the rise to suspense, but also it makes the story interesting to different categories of readers. Somebody is interested in the relationships of the old lady. Somebody is interested in the money matters of the old lady. Somebody is talking about the strained relations of the daughter of the old lady and the stepfather, whom the old lady married at a much later stage, but with a much younger person. So, eventually it also gives another angle, because then it allows the investigators to go into a lot of investigations. That means there are a lot of sampling, questioning, there is a lot of corroboration of statements, and eventually, there's a lot of mystery, lot of suspense in it, and finally, when the open-ended dialogues are made by the either by the chief investigator or by the associate investigator, that means the detective and the associate detective, a lot of haze is removed, and finally, the real culprit is brought into picture, and not only brought into the picture, but also brought in with the uh, person who has committed the crime, and that person is through the narratives, through the analysis, is compelled to confess within the presence of different characters that yes, I did it, and I used this very two weapon, or this device, or whatever it is, uh, whosoever has used the technique to commit the crime. So, what I'm trying to say is that the devices are of many kind. They are the material devices. Those are in terms of relationships. Those are in terms of money matters. Those are in terms of, say, for example, if somebody is a research scientist, and somehow he meets an incident which is not natural, it gives rise to that he might have been having some secret. Certain people might have thought to steal that secret. He didn't budge from the secrecy. He was attacked, he was hurt, and then there are different interests. There are interests of the individual, hidden interests of the states, and like that. So that kind of mysteries are also there in the detective stories. So there are a lot of angles to the detective stories. And uh, finally, as I mentioned, that it gives scope for a lot of interpretation. So what we are actually, you see, what we are discussing is primarily the nature of detective short stories, and how many elements can get into these detective short stories, how they can be made more interesting. So all these are devices, all these are tools. So the more the devices are used, the more dimension it gains, and if there are more the dimensions it has, it is there's a lot of scope for interpretation, and there's a lot of scope for assumption, and more assumptions, more and more speculations give rise to uncertainty that makes it more suspenseful. And if there is more and more suspense, it is deepening story, and as it deepens, as far the story is concerned, it becomes more mystic. A lot of mystery is created, and there's a lot of mystery. The good scope for detective or detection is there, and eventually it becomes a detective story. So, sometimes there are, sometimes in order to bring to the final conclusion, the detectives are very intelligently posing some false clues. You know, what they do? They make a striking note, striking statement to a person who is not at all culprit, but they say, in the presence of the culprit, they say, "Oh yes, you committed the crime." Then the person who is actually committing the crime, or actual criminal or thief or whatever it is, he is psychologically made to reveal, "Oh, no sir, no, he cannot be." So then the person is taken into the net, and then he is asked, "Then you explain who it could be." He said, "No, I don't know." And then the real clues is given by the investigator, and says, "Yes, you did it." So he said, "No, I didn't do it. How could I be?" So then a clue is given, and he said, "Yes, didn't you do it?" Then he had to admit it. He does confess within in the presence of the remaining character. So this is a difference between the real clues, or the use of real clues, and the false clues as a device of the detective story. So the sometimes we have real clues used to make one confess, and prior to that, to go into the final end of the crime, and then to make the criminal confess in public. And sometimes the false clues are also used to compel, or to create a situation where the real culprit is himself or herself admitting to the crime. So all these are types of clues. So there are real clues vis-a-vis false clues. So, dear learners, uh, today we discussed the detective stories. So I am using different names for the detective stories. They are also called the mysteries. They are also called the investigative stories, like this, because those are scenes of crime, scenes of theft, scenes of unsocial activities, events. They are the unethical happening activities. All these gives rise to a certain kind of situation, where situation demands that it be looked into, searched thoroughly, and there is a person who does all this job called a detective, because he detects certain facts, and on the basis of those detections, those factual revelations, the team of detectives arrive at a conclusion, and finally they clear the suspense over a particular activity which is in the nature of crime, or theft, or unethical activity, like that. So this is all about the detective stories, how uh, they are surrounded by suspense, an atmosphere of suspense, how they give scope for the detection, and what is the essence of the detective stories, that is suspense, that is uncertainty, that is mystery. How that suspense is created, a certain situation is created which gives rise to suspense. Then there are continuously elements entering, adding into the central theme, and then it keeps on becoming sustained there. Then it becomes more and more mystified, and events are added to it in a logical manner, so that there is no immediate end to it. It leads to various directions, various detections in the various directions, and eventually sampling is there, then that is analysis are there, and a lot of people work together to bring about the ending statement to the crime. All this happens because of the uh, characters, different characters. So it is very important that the characters are chosen very, very intelligently by the author, because the detective cannot be a person who makes false statement, who makes wrong statements. So that means his qualification has to be shown in the story, in the plot. He should be stated, or he should be introduced as a person of authority. He should establish motivation, and then there are certain characters which are paid more attention to as compared to others. If, for example, like victim is chief, his importance is top. He is given the central place. A lot of description is given about the victim. Then there's a detective. A lot of information is given about the detective, his actions, his moves, and so forth. And also the companions of the detectives. So these are the various characters who are chosen with precision and due consideration. Thirdly, we discussed about the dialogues in the detective short stories. These reveals the motive and the action which takes place in the story, that is revealed through the dialogues. And these dialogues must be conversational, and also they should be helping to move the story, and they should bring in about change in the situation, which is in a way setting tone for appropriate mood for the detective story, because detective stories are much more different than the formula stories. The formula stories, we have very light environment, might be moments of anxiety and sense of isolation and so forth, but there are very different moods. But the mood in the detective story is very, very different, very terse. Sometimes, as we discussed, that the dialogues presents very brutal scene also, in which there is a lot of derogatory language is used. Uh, so that kind of mood is also created through the dialogues only. They are very harsh, they are very violent, and finally, this is very interesting angle to the short story. We didn't discuss it previously, that the devices of multiple clues. So these devices of multiple clues are very important. These are primarily the devices are taking the investigation into different directions where certain solutions are there to resolve the situation. So clues means those are the certain helpful leads or helpful sutras. They help the detectives to reach at the conclusion, and but at the same time, they are not only helpful to the detective to make headway in the investigation, but they are very importantly adding certain different factors to the detective story, because they allow a lot of assumption. They bring in a lot of different angles, as we mentioned. because like Sherlock Holmes is talking about the murder of the old lady, where there are so many other speculations are there. She married a much younger gentleman. Then she had a daughter. The daughter wasn't happy recently with her. The daughter wasn't having good relations with the stepfather as well. The lady had visited the bank same day. She used to wear a diamond ring, a lot of jewelry with her. Then she visited a restaurant where she had a drink or something else to drink. Then she had a conversation with the person, with the lady, beautiful lady on the serving service table. So people were assuming, interpreting it through the love triangle, through the strained relations of the stepfather and the daughter, through a sense of robbery. Somebody might have taken the diamond ring from her hands. Somebody might have taken the cash which was in the purse. So there were a lot of assumptions. So the devices of multiple clues is very important aspect to the detective story, which is added. And finally, we had the real clues vis-a-vis false clues. False clues are presented in order to compel or make a situation so that the real victim, the real culprit, confesses his or her own crime herself or himself, and then the real clues are presented to remove the haze from the scene of the crime and finally to declare who is the actual culprit. So, dear learners, with this, we come to the end of the discussion on this particular topic, that is the detective short stories, because we are discussing the short stories. So, I would like to ask you to, come for discussion. If there is any issue you would like to discuss, we will take maybe a couple of minutes, and then we will, conclude the sessions. So one very important point is about the use of the language, which we discussed with regard to the children short story. Very useful point was there that there shouldn't be long sentences, cliches, or words which are unfamiliar. So I'm using one of those words that we will come to the conclusion. So rather, I will be using the word. We will be coming to the end of the session. So if there is any question, if there is any query, you are welcome. Would you like to ask some questions, some queries there?
Sir, one query, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
Sir, the short story about the children which you are telling, I believe the time span also, the story must not be very long because the attention span of children is also, limited.
Yes, yes, yes. Very important point. I think we discussed it yesterday and we said that they shouldn't be more than 1 or 2 pages.
Yes.
I gave an example of the Panchtantra. The story ends, within 2 to 3 pages, and then a clue is given for the next story. So similarly, if you look at the Gulliver's stories or the fables, Aesop's fables, which are very popular, they are hardly one paragraph stories or two paragraph stories. Very important observation you made. It is very important because children do not sustain their interest for longer period. They want a new thing added to into it. So particularly if you look at the Panchtantra stories, like there is a frog in one story, then it gives clue that there will be crow in the next story. Then there will be a small, another animal which will be entering into the story. So yes, you are very right. Newness is the demand of the children. So they want small segments of the stories. Very well put.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Sir, I
Nehal.
have a question regarding again children's story.
Yes.
Um, uh, it is about the transmission of values.
Yeah.
Yesterday we discussed
Yes.
about
Yes.
the
We discussed.
transmission of values.
Mm.
So my question is this: Roald Dahl, is a well acclaimed writer, a British
Mm.
writer of children's stories, and some of his stories are so hilarious, and our children just take it up. There's absolutely no value addition. It's just pure entertainment.
Mm.
So I mean, it's full of nonsense, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So how do we categorize such stories? Or
Uh, Sneha, very welcome observation. I do agree that you see, I spoke a bit about inculcating values through the stories to the children. Uh, One word I used, they should be very implicitly woven into the story. That is very important. They shouldn't very explicit, very obvious. That is one. But you see, inculcating values or transmitting values is not the prime objective of the short stories for the children. Obviously, this is one point which is always in the consideration. But you see, there's a lot to be described. Lot is to be thought over as to how to weave in some message which is there even in the pure entertainment. You see, say for example, if the people are playing with the swing and they are having fun time, and there are two three children who are sitting on the swing, and maybe there are a couple of others who are just giving it a push, or maintaining the momentum. But one of the crazy boy, suddenly comes and hit it with more pace, and then the swing becomes little unstable, and the children starts to cry. Then there's another child. He comes, oh hey, what are you doing? They might not fall. They might fall if you hit it, if you give it more pace and more speed. So just let us just stop it. We catch hold of it and then stop the swing. So if that kind of description is there, obviously there is some message that we shouldn't, we shouldn't play with it. I mean, one shouldn't obviously try to destabilize something else. That means one has to use some sense. So I do agree with you that in children's literature, primarily it is for their entertainment, but at the same time, some element of values, some very implicit traces of values must also be there. So I don't know. I haven't read this particular authors, but maybe at a certain point of time he might have been giving. But at the same time, we have to admit that there is no one author cannot be very prescriptive. The word is very prescriptive. It has to be maybe found out by the characters themselves whether there is some message or like that. So I do agree. Very explicit or prescriptive value transformation technique or emphasis cannot be in the children's literature, because it is primarily literature which gives them scope for imagination and pure entertainment.
okay, sir, thank you.
So one more point I wanted to just bring out along with that only, that is that the children's stories need to be contemporary rather than because they are growing in this particular age, and the contemporary, they connect better with whatever they are seeing around them and the developmental process they are going through. The contemporary visuals or the plot could be contemporary, wherein it takes them into the fantasy as well, but remaining contemporary than being some from the previous generation or age something.
No, you are very right, sir, because they should have the reality also with them. And we have been talking about that even within the pure entertainment, there has to be some truth in it. So some facts in it. So you are very right. Whatever is happening, particularly with the with the lot of ICT tools, what is happening in it, I think that is definitely have to be part of the children's literature, which must have, which should give them, and bring about affinity with the current happenings. That is very important. And the imagination is now, artificial intelligence is there, lot of interpretiveness is there, lot of dimensions are there. So they literature must bring in these elements into it. Very rightly said.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much for your apt observations, and I really appreciate them. Thank you
So
very
one
much.
more question. One more question.
Yeah,
It is regarding the historical fiction for children.
yeah.
So just as we emphasize on the contemporary events or happenings, uh, for the children not to forget or let's say to get them to know what happened in the past.
Yeah, this is very important because you see the we have also discussed very in the very beginning that
Yes.
where do we look for the plots?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Correct.
that is one, and what we now just now discussed is that we will also have to innovate and bring about the topics which are in the emergence. But you are very right that because there is a lot from the history, lot from the classics, particularly Indian classical literature, which has very specific branch of writing for children, and that is part of the world literature also. So definitely that because this particular branch of literature not only gives entertainment, but it gives lot of implicit knowledge and teaching as well to the children in a very very innate manner, the manner which children very they are naturally adapt gets adapted into. So obviously that has to be there, and it is very important that the very important part of our ancient culture, ancient knowledge is introduced, and it is provided to the children also. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so we'll meet tomorrow, and have a very good day today. We will discuss another topic which is very important topic, that is the experimental story. We are moving from the conventional style of the stories, and we are doing a lot of experiments with the stories. We are coming in different formats with the stories, so we'll discuss it tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Welcome.